Hi, I'm Nora. I'm a professor of public policy at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, and we have our session this afternoon on building sustainability. So this is really building off of all of the stuff everyone's been talking about all day. So it's great to have another kind of crack at the apple, but with more of a focus on thinking about getting to scale and sustainability over time. So all of the same stuff that made it hard to even get started. Now let's just kind of stipulate we can get started and think about sustainability. So we can talk about the long run and the short run today. And what really want to think about this kind of start or additional push to high impact tutoring that came in response to the pandemic, and thinking about this potential for doing what schools have not been able to do to date in terms of fully engaging a broader range of students, leading them to identify successful students and to thrive academically and socially. So as we think about this opportunity to embed tutoring as part of core instruction in schools, we have all of these issues that we need to grapple with. And so really thinking about the will for this, belief in the importance of tutoring, and then all of these types of logistics issues that people have been talking about with scheduling and staffing to get to scale, thinking about the sources for high quality tutors and opportunities for tutors to develop and reach their professional goals, and the funding to go with all of this, not just now, but after the ESSER window closes. So this panel is to get us started thinking about sustainability before we go back to groups for in-depth discussions about our respective roles in this effort. So we have a great panel today with a broad range of perspectives. They're each very accomplished individuals, but I will keep the bios super short so we can learn from them instead of about them. I'll go in order here. Kenya Bradshaw is Chief Program Officer at Reconstruction US. Estefania Rios is an English teacher at Rahway High School in New Jersey and a member of the Accelerator's Tutoring Advisory Group. I think Derek is the next person. Good. Is the Deputy Chief of Teaching and Learning at Dallas Independent School District. And Michael Maher is the Executive Director of the Office of Learning Recovery and Acceleration at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. So we're going to start off, I think, with a poll for the audience. This is your reward for making it all the way to 250, is that you get to take out your phone. Okay, you're going to use your phone and let us know, what do you think the biggest issue in sustaining high impact tutoring at scale is? And I realize it's frustrating to not have other or to be able to qualify, but do your best with the options. So 1 is total budget, 2 is district reallocation of funds, 3 scheduling, 4 staffing, 5 interest, belief in the potential, and 6 is evidence of effectiveness. Kind of mesmerizing. Okay, we might not be done, but I'm going to say we have a tie for first with total budget and staffing. And open it up to our panelists. Derek, starting off with you, which one of these is most stressful to you as you think about scaling? And are you thinking of any first steps for long-run sustainability? How do you think about all of this, both in your capacities leading on ESSER and on tutoring?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for letting us be part of this discussion. I think these are really interesting responses. And one of the things that I did not come into today questioning, but am now questioning as we've had this conversation, is what we mean by scale. I don't think we defined that in the room today, and in conversations I've been part of thus this morning. It feels like folks are thinking about that word and that concept very differently, and that may color how you answer this question, because it certainly would for me. In the Dallas ISD context, and you've heard about our Texas legislation probably 3 too many times today, but scale means a lot of kids. Like, it means every student who did not pass our state exam. In our district right now, that's over 45,000 students. So for us, scheduling and staffing are huge challenges. Like, how do you find enough people to come in and support that number of students? And how do you do that in a way that you can ensure it actually fits into the day, even if that's a partially extended after-school day? But the other thing I would add to the conversation that happened a little bit up here earlier in terms of what happened in No Child Left Behind or other contexts is this district reallocation of funding, which I think is actually a different proxy for the total budget answer. I think we are traditionally bad as educators at making hard choices and getting rid of stuff. And so as ESSER comes and goes, it's going to force really difficult decisions onto districts. And if tutoring is going to be a lasting part of what we do, I think we've got to have conversations now across our systems about what we're going to deprioritize, both to make the people and the time available, to my scheduling and staffing point, but also to ensure there's the financial resources available to continue the work.
I'm very tempted to follow up and ask you how those conversations are going so far.
I think they're not happening. Like, that's part of the challenge. Is we're 2 years from the end of ESSER, so to speak. And I was in a different conversation 2 weeks ago with a bunch of CFOs across the country, and some of their states hadn't even released their ESSER $3. So it's hard to have how do you phase this out when you're not even to the how do you phase it in place of the work. But I think we've all got to start thinking right now about what our world looks like 2 school years from now when this massive amount of funding is not in place. So I don't think they are happening yet, but I think that means we're almost too late to start planning.
Thanks. Well, while we're on ESSER, I think I'll switch over to Michael then, if you want to get in there from the state perspective on this same set of issues.
Yeah, so thanks for the time and having me here today. So as I kind of looked at this poll, I think 2 things in particular that stood out for me are both the staffing question and the evidence of effectiveness question. I think about these things at kind of 2 points in time. So my office in North Carolina oversees all of the ESSER programs. We're focused on programmatic implementation of various recovery programming, in addition to kind of monitoring the 20% ARP at the district level, providing research and evaluation support to districts. So thinking about from a state perspective. And so staffing is certainly one of the biggest challenges that I've heard. I travel the state, talk to superintendents. We have 115 traditional public schools, we have 204 charter schools. So they're broken up by region. Staffing is a regional problem in North Carolina. It's a very different place in terms of, we've got big urban districts that have, and you've heard some, we have some great programs like what's happening in Guilford County, what Dr. Freeman talked about, where they have 2 great universities. They're able to draw university students in to try to plug some of those challenges you have with staffing. But we have very rural parts of North Carolina, particularly up in the Northeast corridor, where there are no higher education institutions. We have students in middle school who go their entire 4-year career never having had a licensed math teacher. So think about staffing not only with tutors, we can't find licensed teaching staff for some of these programs. So staffing is a real challenge. The other piece for North Carolina is this evidence of effectiveness. My office pushed really hard on evaluating the impact of recovery programming. And so we're lucky to have the North Carolina Education Corps is another program that we've invested in. They have a rigorous evaluation that they've set up with Dr. Sperling and some partners from the Friday Institute at NC State. So we're doing some rigorous evaluation of these programs, because when this is over, somebody's going to have to go to the North Carolina General Assembly and talk about the evidence of effectiveness to try to then further sustain funding from a state level unless we go down this reallocation of funds question, looking at Title I, Title II, or something like that. So yeah, so I'm actually trying to think of both of the staffing in the short term and evidence in the long term.
And on the reallocation of funds, what do you think would need to happen to get that conversation started?
So in North Carolina, one of the things, so we have a list of chronically low performing schools. We have these regional support teams that go out, and our agency is actually going through some transition now. We're actually losing 2 of our deputies. I actually have a 4:30 phone call about reorganizing the entire state agency. So we are going to reorg the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. On June 1st, we'll have a different kind of organizational structure. And in line with that, we're also talking more about our regional support model and how we're supporting low-performing districts and schools, and that actually encompasses a lot of that funding.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll make this brief so you can go reorganize your whole state department. Switching gears a little, there's been, discussion not just thinking about the states and the districts, but thinking about the community, thinking about teachers, thinking about students. Unfortunately, we do not have a student, but AJ, I have to say, if you're still here, I really appreciated your testimony as a former student. Steph, if you want to go first, just your thoughts on teachers' roles in getting the tutoring starting, and as you speculate about what it would be like to build towards sustainability in programs.
Hello everyone, my name is Estefania Rios, and I've been working in my district for about 10 years. Coming back to school after the pandemic and after virtual teaching, I realized there was an openness in administrators and district leaders that wasn't there before, and I've been really lucky to work in a school that is very open to trying new things to make sure that we're meeting the students where they are. So I think in order to build something that's sustainable, you have to have conversations and make space within the day to collaborate with teachers, because it does take a village, and part of that village to raise that child is the teacher, the parents, and the community members. So if you make that space, you will often find teachers have great ideas to problems that we have. They know exactly the population that they're working with. They've seen the children in the school for the past 4 years, so they really have the input that we would need to make this sustainable. But first, we need the time. So I would say the teacher role is very important, as long as they're given the platform that they need to have those conversations.
Thanks. And in terms of making that time and having the right kind of platform, is there anything that you would say has worked well, or maybe could be adjusted differently that you've seen in your context?
Yeah, like I said, like the fact that the administrators are now prioritizing teacher voice in conversations, I have noticed that they make a conscious effort to just open up the floor for anyone to speak. So for instance, we have our administrators who have like our monthly coffee talks, and they can have teachers come in and parents come in, community members, to have conversations about what exactly it is that the students need to be successful. In order for that to kind of go through, again, it means the administrator has to take some time away from other priorities, but when making that space, I think it definitely pays off in the long run.
Thanks. And Kenya, building off of this discussion of the community voice in this, what do you see as community role in building sustainable tutoring, including but not limited to participation as tutors?
So before I answer that, there are 2 pieces that I just want to bring into this space and conversation. I feel like, one, the conversation that we've been having today feels very similar to education conversations that we've had over the last 20 years. And I just want to say, if we do the same shit over and over, we're going to get the same we seem resolved that we can't change what's happening in the school day. Like people were talking about, oh, we need to be in school. One, if you are in school, then what are we doing in school that you feel like you need to go in for another 2 hours to work with kids on what they're not getting? Like, we should really think about how we're adjusting it. And I'm not saying that we don't need one-on-one personalized learning. Every child deserves that. But if we are just saying we're going to focus on remediation for math and literacy for students, then something is fundamentally off on how we're teaching them in the first place. And we still need to go in and adjust that. And that's not what we do for wealthy white children in this country. And we don't, if that's what y'all do, that's not what I'm seeing. And so I think that if we're just going to focus on reading and math, we are missing a huge opportunity to be able to work with our kids. When you look at the data around what parents said during COVID, so look at where they went to. So a significant number of parents left traditional public schools and went to charter schools and homeschool. So African-American parents in particular, only 3% of them were homeschooling their children before COVID. That number is over 19% of parents. They are fundamentally telling us what you are providing to our children does not reflect what we need. We saw communities of BIPOC parents come out and say, if you are not embedding our culture into the instruction of our children, you no longer get the privilege of educating our children. And so if we are building tutoring systems and instruction that don't actually represent what we've heard from them, then I would actually urge all of us to go back and reflect on why are we doing this and what is our outcome that we're trying to get to in the end if we are not doing what we think our children need or are reflective of the wishes of their parents and their community. So that's A. B, Alex said a lot of the stuff that I would say when he talked about the need for authentically engaging communities. Many of us have already determined what the curriculum that we're going to have, how we're going to run our programs, who we're going to hire in our programs before we ever go and ask communities what you want from the programs that we are bringing into your community or servicing your children. An example is if we are doing work in Louisiana. When we said we're going to do this after school, the parents said, hey, that's cute, but I actually got to go pick up other kids, and so I don't really have time to be leaving my children here. So are y'all going to provide transportation and do all these other things? You know, if we had just asked them, we could have avoided this from the beginning and figured out how we could have worked that program fundamentally better. And so I am just adamant about that if we don't engage communities in this, number one, this is an opportunity for us to transfer some wealth to the communities that we have the privilege of serving. So in who you're hiring, how do you think about that these are representatives of the community that you're training and developing? It could be a great opportunity for you to build a paraprofessional pipeline of new teachers who are coming in, and the difference between these and any of the critiques we have of many of our teacher program, these are citizens in our community. They're gonna be here when some of us get the whim to want to go and do something else. The second piece of this is their community and their work. The average tenure of a superintendent in the U.S. is maximum 5 years. Then they go on and they go to another district. It really is around 3.5. I'm trying to be gracious because during COVID, folks can stay around the districts a little bit longer than they normally do. The tenure of school board members is 6 years, but people who live in the community stay. And so we do these initiatives without embedding them into the priorities of communities. So when we get a new superintendent, we get a new 100-day plan and they focus on something different. The only way you are going to sustain tutoring is if you go to the community first and explain to them what are we trying to solve for and how are we trying to support your children, and then engaging them on, is this reflective of what you would want us to do to be able to solve that problem? One thing that they're going to say, we might want you all to do something differently, or we want you to do this and so if we step back a little bit and have that as a part of it, and include that in the rubric, which is also nice, we didn't talk about them at all, and what they want. Like I think that we have an opportunity to do something a little bit differently than we have done in the past.
Thank you. As I'm thinking about if that were to happen and you had like real community engagement, then you would be faced with all of these challenges of what are we supposed to do with this input, and not just kind of a resource in dollars, resource in staff, but then things like what is the curricular focus, and the hours in the day, and adding in the constraints around state standards or graduation requirements and stuff like that. And so thinking about just how very hard this is, and I'm curious to put to the rest of the panel, as you think about this, like, how much wiggle room does it feel like that there is in the day, or in planning all of these scheduling questions that people keep asking? Where do you see like the pockets that can be re-engineered if this is happening as something incremental rather than we're blowing the whole thing up? Or you can say we have to blow the whole thing up. I'll leave it open.
One thing for me, if you ask people what they want, then you listen to them and do the things that they say. Like, it does take more time to do, but I think that in the long run, you can get better results. And so if you allow them to co-design what they need, like, we just could do things a little bit differently. The other thing is, I think that we could solve some of the delivery questions that we're having about school day. Maybe you look at your community, and after you've done a landscape analysis of who services children in your city, then you could say 50% of this needs to be delivered during the school time. And then we have organizations who already have children, who may have staff, that we could retrain to be able to deliver it where children are going to be. So half of that is going to be delivered in community partner programs. Like, I think you could be more creative around how we're administering programs if you were to engage them authentically.
I would have to agree with that. I think at this moment, the best time to start planning for this would probably be now. The summer months are definitely coming, and we know that we have a little bit more space and time as administrators, district leaders, teacher leaders. So the sooner you plan, the better. I do believe it's really important to involve the community and the teachers, because the students will work harder, engage, and connect with the educator who they feel has invested in them. And that means, do you talk to my mom? Have you checked in on me? Did you praise what I did in class, as well as tell them what I need work on? So the more they see this kind of joint effort, the more likely they will be to kind of show up for you. And I think at the end of the day, that ends up being a priority for every administrator, student success, and the only way we can kind of get there is through this collaboration. So I definitely agree with you.
I might derail our conversation right here, but I think everything I hear both of you saying is exactly what I would want to see to be true in our district, but it comes down to somebody like me sitting in a seat who's responsible for making that happen. And I've been fortunate to do a lot of family engagement facing work in Dallas ISD, particularly over the past 3 years. But I would say, still sitting here today, I don't know how to do what you just described. Can you? I don't actually know how to go out there and use the word authentic, which is beautiful. How do you authentically have a conversation with the community, and what is the community? Because we do lots of stuff in schools that are quote-unquote family engagement type things, and you get a handful of people showing up, and that becomes the community's voice. But I don't think that's not what I'm hearing from you, rather. And I don't think that's what we're after. So I think we got to do a lot of learning within educational institutions to first figure out how to even operationalize that process, which then can lead us to how do you re-operationalize what our actual programs or delivery structures are. But most districts, including ours, unfortunately, don't dedicate real staff capacity to that first point. So we just sort of keep circling around, and you're still stuck with people like me who's like, that's great, let's do it, but how?
One, I appreciate the vulnerability of standing in front of the crowd and saying, hey, I'm really on TV. So I say thank you for that. I think that there are people in your community who do know how to do that. I think that if you are to ask, like, who in this community does an authentic job at survey, one of the ways that I lead in helping to orientate people to think about this, who do people go to in a moment of crisis? And so in Houston, like, it is this man named Mattress Max, and I know if anybody is in Houston, like you know. So he runs a furniture store, and every time there is a hurricane or there's something that goes on, he opens his store to be the place where people know that they can go to. So why aren't we engaging Mattress Max, who now has this enormous list of all these people who he has engaged during like catastrophes, and he engages them. So we know those people. So if you lean into the orientation of asking them, how do you get to people and how do you engage them? There's a service organization in San Antonio that told me we service 70,000 families. I said, who do you get funding from? They said, nobody. Our families pay to get support. I was like, who knows that you are doing this work? They were like, well, you came, so somebody knows. And I was like, okay, they got it right. And so, like, if you go and try to figure out those programs or ask the people, who do they trust? And then engage those partners that they say that they trust and help them. Many of those partners do direct service delivery. They might not do tutoring, but you can say, this is an add-on that we can provide to you. I'm gonna give you the staff, I'm gonna train your people, I'm gonna put resources, I'm gonna pay stipend to your person who does this work as a program administrator. And then you can audit and say, like, you might still be delivering AJ and the work that they do. They might still be delivering the exact same program, but that could be delivered in a community where people are and where they already trust the service provider. So it may not be fundamentally different, it's just the where and how you are engaging them that could be different.
If you don't mind, can I build on that for 1 second? I just wanted to share that when you said how do we, get the community members involved, and I hear what you're saying about, reaching out and finding out who people go to crisis, but I think at the very basic level, it's just a matter of having conversations, right? And we went back into school and it was like, get them back on track, make sure that they are learning, make sure that they're, filling in those gaps, but it's like, we're all recovering from this trauma. So a lot of districts around me have been doing like a SEL day, and which is like a day of just conversation, having conversations with the students and learning about them so that we can use that information to kind of build a community in the school. So I think a great place to start is to kind of really take a look at the SEL approach, and I think something that's great about high impact tutoring is that that approach is going to be built in there as another means of support. So I think conversations definitely with students, but they'll tell you a lot if you give them the space to share, will get you to those people.
Okay, I'm going to bring us from a very interesting high-level discussion down to very granular details, just because it's so much of what people have been talking about earlier today in different groups at the tables, kind of sighing about logistics and just like actually doing the thing and the barriers that people are running into. And so I thought, I know I can't remember who said this earlier today, but about how, if we had kind of a recipe for this. And so I just wanted to offer the panelists an opportunity to, share something that like you wish your former self knew when you started in on this road, or that you would offer to someone facing what's ahead. And this can be as speculative as you would like. And if you want, Michael, you can start.
That's a big one to start. So one of the things I think, my office took about 6 months to really ramp up the work that we were trying to do. And one of the lessons for us was around trying to drive with data, right? Make good decisions using data. And the thing that I think sticks with me a lot, particularly around tutoring, is how are we deciding? We have to prioritize, and how are we doing that? So the law, I mean, ARP says you are supposed to be providing intervention to students who have been most disproportionately impacted by COVID. How do you know which kids were most disproportionately impacted, and in what way, right? Because it's both academic and social emotional. And so what we try to do, and we spent a year doing an analysis of law, we called it Lost Instructional Time, and it was a full population study of North Carolina, all 1.6 million kids. We delivered all that data to our districts, and we know in North Carolina that over 600,000 children had at least one negative academic outcome from the pandemic. Some had multiple negative outcomes. We know that middle grades mathematics is the highest area of need for us. And we've invested funding in early learning, early literacy. We're investing funding in math. So for us, it's about kind of leading with this data. I think, looking back, what would have been helpful in retrospect is we established an advisory committee in August or September. And our advisory committee represents 33 individuals who cut across the state of North Carolina. Every representative group that you could imagine is on that committee. And we bring to them every month, we bring to them interventions that we're putting in place, studies that are ongoing, here's what we're trying to invest in, and we get feedback, so that's some of that community feedback. If I'd had a chance to go back, I think what I would have done in March when I was hired, that's probably the first thing I would have done.
Thanks.
I think there's a lot of things I wish we could do over in our district context. One of them goes back to what we heard in the last panel. I think you said this, in making sure we're clear on what tutoring is and what it isn't in our organization. We're still grappling a little bit with, no, I'm doing tutoring, it's okay, and it's the traditional come get some help for your homework or retake an exam or those sort of after school special type things. And so I don't think that we have made enough of the case within our organization on why this is such a big deal and why we're trying to go so big with it. The second thing I wish we had done differently is looked at our legislation and the 45,000 kids that we got to try to tutor this year and say, that sounds great, but that's crazy. And so let's actually try to solve for something smaller and better rather than try to solve for all of it as good as we can get it, which in reality, we haven't been able to solve for all of it due to a number of challenges this year. But to your point on who's going to go into the state houses and advocate for continued focus and support of this, that would be the third policy thing, which I think folks in this room could really help with. There are probably, I don't know this, and there are researchers in the room who probably do, but it seems like there are very few things we do in education that we can prove in 3 years' time, right? We're just not that good at working that quickly at such a high quality level. So we've all got to face the challenge that when the money goes away from ESSER and we're still left with students who need help, probably outcomes aren't the way we're going to be able to make the case across the board. And I wish we had started even locally with our school board, having that conversation earlier in the process. I think we're just now starting to get to that.
I would have to agree. I think starting the conversation early is definitely going to be a way to get to success. But I also do believe that you should go into the conversations and with community members, teachers, administrators, with this idea that we're going to be in the road zone for a little while, and we don't want to fight those ideas with automatically going to the barriers or knocking them down because we tried them before. Kind of really listen to understand, not listen to respond. And I think that might make the biggest difference when it comes to trying to meet the needs of our students with high impact tutoring.
Recently, Vanderbilt put out a study around volunteer pre-K effectiveness, and what it showed was that all the money that we've invested in helping to get teachers, schools, NACE certified, and a lot of the other investments, that it wasn't to waste, but we had narrowed what we were doing in early childhood so much that we were moving the second grade and kindergarten standards into what we were doing in pre-K. But we weren't allowing children to play. Like, we weren't engaging them in who they could be as people and weren't making this a joyous environment. I really wish we could think about what are the lessons that we learned from how we should be thinking about that and rethink about what the K-12 environment should be for students now, especially when we have all of this data around our children are more anxious now. They are more depressed than they have ever been before, and they are experiencing very traumatic life experiences. Like, we have over 200,000 kids who have lost either one or both caregivers during COVID. And like, if that's the reality of what they're living in, how do we think broader than just the remediation of their education and really think about how we're preparing them for life? The second piece for me is ESSA money is going to end. And if that is a fact that we know, then what are we doing to be able to make sure that we are preparing for the fiscal sustainability of this work, not just on the state level, just because this is sexy right now. Like, everybody, like, what are we doing? Tutoring, I'm gonna quit my job, I'm gonna go take care of it, I'm gonna do this and save babies in this kind of way. It's just one of those things that people find attractive because they think this is the fix for the problem that we have. People's attention span is going to change in the next 18 months, and they're gonna find the next new hot shit. And if this is not it, then how do we make sure that we are looking at local bond levies and how people in their local communities sustain the work that we have brought them into as a belief this is what their children should have long term?
Can I add one thing that I think is local, but we all should be thinking about? To that point, tutoring is a scarce resource right now, but it's going to become more scarce when this funding goes away. And I think we've all got to have really good, deep, hard conversations on who does the tutoring get allocated to from a public perspective. Like, private wealthy families can go find it on their own, but in most of our public school settings, who are we going to ensure gets that support?
Thanks. I'd like to open for questions from the floor. We just have a few minutes. Sorry, I didn't give a warning to start thinking. Yeah. Is that Aaron?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm the CEO of Intervene K-12. We are a high-impact tutoring provider out of Texas. Texas is well represented here today. So my question is, thinking back pre-COVID, pre-high-impact tutoring as an initiative. We've been tutoring for 6+ years inside of school districts. And for us, we had to educate our school districts, our partners on this can happen inside the school day. This is RTI. This can fulfill those requirements. And year over year, we grew. More district partners adopted us. We grew inside the district. This is prior to ESSER funding. They found the funding then. Why aren't we going to be able to continue to find the funding if it was already there? What are we spending our dollars on in RTI right now? If we know that tutoring is evidence-based, if we know that it's growing our students, why don't we continue to find the funding? Right now is the time to stand up these systems, to get it right, but let's figure out how to sustain it. The dollars are there. So that question is for the panel and statement, actually, for the group. But I know Derek, you specifically are thinking about that. Can you talk to us about that?
I think there's a few points that I would say back. One, it brings me back to my question about what does scale mean for us? Because yes, we've been doing tutoring pre-pandemic. There will be tutoring, post-ESSER. But how much is, I think, really the question, and for how many students? So that would be number one. Number two, is sadly, even in the Dallas case, yeah, we were doing tutoring and we had really good partners, but it wasn't really a big focus for us. And this goes back to sort of the attention span. Like, we had people we trust that had some good evidence and like they were going out there and doing their work. I think we're all at a space where we have to become much more sophisticated and rigorous in sussing out quality and impact, so that when there are choices down the road about who gets funded, that we're doing that based on evidence and not just based on, because we've done it before. The third thing to the RTI or MTSS point is those systems usually exist, and there's a few people who really know a lot about it and do it well, but for the most part, schools just aren't very good at that either. And so it's, hey, I'm gonna go put a kid on this computer to do a thing for a little while, or I'm gonna have some other resource. But that goes back to an earlier conversation this morning about how do we sort of reimagine what these experiences are like for students. And hopefully this time for us helps push all of those things forward.
I think we can take one more question.
To Aaron's question, one thing is not just ESSA money. So many communities are funded on property taxes, and we are going to have some issues around property tax collection because of housing prices that we're going through. And so if you begin to do the fiscal analysis around like property tax collection in communities, if you don't have a guaranteed state allocation for funding, and those communities who depend on it, you can expect that there will be funding issues in those communities that are broader than ESSA as well. I'm not saying that you couldn't reallocate how districts are spending RTI Title I money, but it will be broader than just the ESSA fund impact.
Well, thank you. This was an amazing panel. So thank you, Nora. Is a really interesting one, and it also kind of points to this as this moment of opportunity. We can continue to think of tutoring as kind of this add-on, and we may not be able to do it as much as we're doing it now with the change in money, but we can also think of it as this opportunity to kind of further engage the community and change what we're looking for in the outcomes for students or in the processes. We can think about it changing the staffing of schooling so that we have many more community members in the schools, many more students from the local universities, just changing the staffing models of schools or the way that we're reallocating resources. So I think there's like lots of questions about what we really can do at this moment in order to, be 5 years down the road in a better place than we were prior to the pandemic. Instead of the goal being just to get back to where we were, the goal should really be, I think, we have this recognition that most kids need individualized attention in order to really engage in school and to learn. This isn't something that is just a couple of kids need this, and that's what, and we can find this add-on for them. It's really trying to think about whether this could be available for most kids in a way that makes their whole schooling more effective.